So as Gal mentioned, today we are going to talk about getting the most out of EPSS for risk prioritization. And in order for us to actually understand how to utilize EPSS in the best way, we're proud to introduce Octavian Suciu. Octavian, can you please introduce yourself so our audience will get to know you and also understand why you are actually the perfect match for this conversation?
Thanks, Roy. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Maryland, and my research looks at how we could effectively apply machine learning for various cybersecurity problems. And I'm particularly passionate about developing risk indicators for vulnerabilities and understanding how we could reduce the impact of exploits or even respond early to such exploits. And that's why I'm also involved in the EPSS effort. This is where I'm part of the core data team. I do data analysis, feature engineering, and I also look at ensuring the robustness and effectiveness of our machine learning models, part of EPSS.
So indeed, the perfect man for this conversation. So thank you very much. We are glad to have you here. Let's begin from the basics. What is EPSS actually? What is it good for? What is it used for?
Yeah, so EPSS stands for Exploit Prediction Scoring System. It is a community-driven effort, part of FIRST, the same work behind CVSS, as many of you I'm sure know. EPSS has the goal of deriving a probability of observing exploitation activity in the wild and within the next 30 days or so. It is focusing on global estimates of exploitation activity as reported by various IDS or intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, various honeypots that we have access to. And it is based on machine learning. What we do is we collect public and private data about vulnerabilities, the technical information about those vulnerabilities and exploits, and we try to associate that with past exploitation activity, goal being for our machine learning models to learn to predict in the future what exploitation activity will look like for future vulnerabilities. EPSS is not focused on forecasting whether a particular organization will be exploited or there's going to be exploitation attempts. It is a global estimate of exploit activity. So probabilities of EPSS are updated daily, function of whatever information we could collect about the vulnerabilities. So those probabilities are, as I mentioned, always look ahead estimates of 30 days exploitation likelihood.
Okay, so if we're talking about this 30 days time frames, what would happen to a vulnerability after that time frame has passed? Like whether an exploit has been found in the wild or if it hasn't been, what would the change to the EPSS scoring be after that 30 days time frame?
Right. So great point. Many vulnerabilities are exploited years on end. We see this resurgence sometimes as well. Especially if there's a highly functional exploit available, a lot of script kiddies will use it over and over again. So EPSS tries to account to take this into account by updating the predictions. We update the predictions daily, and we always try to take into account all the information that's published about not all of it, all that we could get our hands on about the vulnerabilities, the technical details of those vulnerabilities, the exploits, and also the age of the vulnerabilities, and try to learn like the historical decay and exploitation activity in the past for vulnerabilities of similar types, similar characteristics, and predict over time how this exploitation likelihood changes. That's why it's important to always look at the latest EPSS scores, which would give the most accurate approximation of exploitation likelihood in the near future.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff that you're mentioning here is, it sounds to me like there's a lot of either correlation of overlap between the CVSS score, which is probably the most common score that people use today in order to prioritize their vulnerabilities. What would you say, or how would you suggest to handle those two together?
Yeah, so EPSS is not by any means designed to replace CVSS. When you mentioned that a lot of people use CVSS, I assume, like based on my conversation, is that a lot of them focus on the base score, which captures characteristics of the vulnerabilities, even though CVSS has some great like other components which are not that widely available. But the base score has been shown time and again to not be very good at predicting exploitation in the wild or refracting it. So it is a very poor predictor. This is where EPSS comes into play, because exploitation in the wild depends on many factors outside what CVSS captures. Exploitation, exploit availability, the skills of the attackers, opportunity cost, patching cadence, and so on and so forth. What we try with EPSS is to implicitly, or sometimes even explicitly, if we have the data, capture some of those characteristics and go beyond what the CVSS base score does. So I would say that EPSS is in fact complementing CVSS from this perspective. And how this translates into practices, if CVSS is high, you're usually mandated to prompt to resolve the issue. But how do you prioritize your resources within this bucket of high CVSS scores? Perhaps this is where EPSS is good. You look at those that have high CVSS, but a few of them have high probability in EPSS as well. You should probably consider those first and prioritize them. To be honest, it's not entirely clear how EPSS and CVSS should be combined, and I don't think there's a silver bullet. We had Frank before had a great intuitive example of risk metrics, and if EPSS doesn't try to capture the impact aspect of risk, and even in terms of the likelihood, we're not able to capture the individual impact on a particular organization. We only look at the global aspect of the likelihood formula. So we're always happy to hear stories of how people use EPSS in practice and learn more and improve upon the comments that we get.
Yep, and that led me to the next point, like getting the feedback from the people who use it in their day-to-day to prioritize the risk, or in order to try and predetermine what's going on. Let me try and challenge you and ask you, what is the negative feedback you're getting about the EPSS model, and what are the challenges that people are experiencing when they're using it in their day-to-day vulnerability management program?
Right. So I'm lucky enough, but unfortunately, we don't really get that much feedback. So that's one of the issues. We don't have
it's
that
lucky
much
sometimes.
We share the scores publicly in the open. There's no reporting back needed. There's no feedback loop. So any feedback, success or failure stories are more than welcome. But two things that we hear most about are about transparency and completeness. Transparency related to users see a score going up or down, and they want to know why this happened. It's a perfectly reasonable request. The reason we are not able to do that right now, but we are considering doing it in the future if we come up with good ideas for it, is because we have contractual obligation with the data partners that share sometimes commercial feeds, things that are not publicly available. We're not able to distribute that through EPSS. So that's one of the main reasons. We do share some interpretability results from the model, but it's definitely not enough for someone that is looking for transparency. Then the completeness ties back to EPSS not being a silver bullet of risk assessments. The users want to know what to prioritize ultimately. They probably don't really care about EPSS. So, but as I said, that depends on many factors: the environmental factors, reachability, compensating controls, which we could not capture, and it's outside the scope of EPSS. And I think platforms like Vulcan are really key there to make the most out of EPSS and come up with better risk assessments for one's organization.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like we all know that the security personnel value transparency and clarity above everything else. So that feedback kind of makes sense. But what you were saying also explains why the model is not open source if you have all these integrations with third-party systems. That kind of makes sense. So if I were to ask you to give like a one golden advice for our audience on how would they infuse EPSS on their day-to-day risk management, what would that advice look like?
Okay, yeah. So I would say start with threat intel first. If you have threat intel, start with that. Like one good example is the Log4j vulnerability from a few years ago. You don't need EPSS for that. You know that it's a priority. You should go for that, right? But if you don't have threat intel or you're done with those vulnerabilities, then perhaps it's time to turn to EPSS and combine the probability that EPSS outputs with the contextual information and environmental information that you get from other sources, and perhaps set the priorities accordingly. Perhaps you want to look and patch a vulnerability that is lower probability on an internet-facing device than other that is in like a high probability one within an like a isolated environment. Heuristics like that makes sense for your context. Just keep in mind that EPSS is a global estimator of threat and not necessarily of the impact on your particular organization. Also one word of caution is that just because something is scored low, it doesn't mean that it should necessarily be ignored. The 1% probability in EPSS means that 1 in 100 such vulnerabilities are exploited, but we are at about 25,000 vulnerabilities a year, so that adds up to a lot of vulnerabilities. So yeah, that would be my advice to practitioners. So I would be really happy to hear stories about EPSS in practice. We're always open to welcoming new members and contributors alike.
Perfect. So you're saying keep your eyes open on what's going outside, always take everything with some cautious, and use external systems like Vulcan in order to inject more scoring and more intelligence into the final decision. Thank you very much for joining us today, Octavian. I think it's always nice speaking the brains of the people behind the scenes of the scoring that we use. I think it was very valuable, and thank you.
Thanks a lot, Roy.